is a wonderful honour to be able to be with you this afternoon and to share some thoughts. As I entered the lift in the hotel that I'm staying at, I said hello to another couple that were in there. Where are you from? You've guessed it, they were from Tasmania. And I thought to myself, it is a small world. Then I got in the car this morning to drive up here, and I saw a road sign telling me Darwin was over 3,000 kilometres away. And I soon reminded myself that this is not a small country. It is a wonderful, wonderful country. And it's made up of wonderful people, such as yourselves, who are absolutely devoted to ensuring that Australia continues to be the wonderful country that she has been and undoubtedly will continue to be. To the President, congratulations on your re-election, but more importantly, thanks so much for your service. To the newest life member, congratulations, well done, well deserved by all accounts. Philip Benwell, who has been such a tower of strength for the Australian Monarchist League, with whom I worked so closely and still continue to work so closely, because the Constitutional Monarchy is something that is definitely worthwhile protecting. I was asked this afternoon to talk on the topic, honouring our inheritance. Not understanding one's inheritance is not to understand oneself, which in turn is a disservice to self and the rich heritage of which we individually and our society are the beneficiaries. Knowing your roots, your heritage and traditions provides a foundation, an anchor and a sense of identity. Attempting to exist in a vacuum is always fraught. Currently, we have this two-track approach being promoted by those who seek to denigrate their own heritage, but deliberately are willing to honour the heritage of every other culture. Have you ever noticed that? They will demean everything that is the British constitutional system, our democracy, whatever, but then will simply support every other culture. Having been to church this morning, I was yet again reminded of the basic building blocks of our culture. We are all equal in the sight of the Almighty, which should inform our behaviour toward each other. I was also reminded of human frailty, which afflicts all of humanity, irrespective of skin colour or culture. Some would call it original sin. Whatever we call it, we are all tainted, which begs the question in every rational mind, why do some so wholeheartedly embrace and honour all elders, past and present, and sometimes even future, or as yet unknown, elders of a particular culture, but refuse to do so for their own? These elements are anxious to point out the shortcomings of the elders of their culture, which in itself is a worthwhile exercise, but they refuse to countenance the possibility of either past or present elders in other cultures of having behaved in a suboptimal manner. It is a curious approach, to say the least. Here in Australia, irrespective of our origins, we are the beneficiaries of Australia's forebears' efforts. Enjoying peace, freedom, well-being, wealth, democracy, and the rule of law, to mention a few, in no particular order. Their efforts have delivered to us the country which is literally the envy of the world. Millions want to call Australia home. The number of immigration applications tell us all we need to know. And of course, in Australia, one of the great freedoms is everyone who wants to can leave. There is a huge queue to enter, an exceptionally large one. On the other hand, I don't know of a single application to leave. Indeed, you don't even have to apply. That in itself should be a reality check for the naysayers and those who make a career out of denigrating our country and its heritage, or, as I see it, the self-loathers. Each generation needs to be reminded and taught that the benefits enjoyed today were literally bought with and built on the blood, sweat and tears of our forebears. Generations of Australians have sacrificed their very best to defend our nation and the virtues on which it is built. This unsurpassed contribution is rightly honoured at the plethora of war memorials scattered around our nation, throughout our cities and country towns alike. The memorials are an expression of thanks and honour to our service personnel. Go to any RSL, sporting club or civic hall and you will see the honour rolls celebrating the contributors. Connecting ourselves with our past and our forebears provides the foundation on which we can successfully build and project into the future. Thankfully, we have organisations such as this, Australians for a Constitutional Monarchy and the Australian Monarchists League, and again, Philip, to see you here, and many other similar type organisations who, in contributing to our communities, also celebrate and honour our heritage. I salute those volunteers here this afternoon and right around our country who so willingly give of themselves to achieve this vital social good. Yet as organisations such as this go about their task, we have others who seek to force-feed a negative narrative, poisoning the next generation's view of their own heritage and thus themselves. As we wonder why, and then we wonder why our children are suffering excessive levels of anxiety and other disorders. Australia has an history for which we ought to be exceptionally thankful. Was it perfect? Will it be perfect? We all know the answer to these two questions, and the answer is no. Nevertheless, in comparing ourselves with other cultures and societies, we can objectively say our forebears didn't do too bad, or to frame it in the colloquial positive, they done good. That said, we should always aspire to do even better. If only our children were taught a truthful version of our history, their mental well-being and outlook would be so much enhanced. Some will tell you about the convict origins of modern Australia, yet they refuse to celebrate that in comparison to other colonising powers, the British were clearly the most enlightened. If you were to be colonised, you could have done a lot worse than be colonised by the British. Indeed, in establishing a country, a colony I should say, indeed in establishing a colony, how many authorities provided edicts, such as King George III gave to Governor Arthur Phillip, namely, and I quote, to live in amity with the natives. Why aren't our children taught these important lessons, confirming Britain as a leader in its day? And why aren't our children taught that the very first case brought under English law in Australia was the case of Cable, where a convict couple on the First Fleet successfully sued the ship's captain for the return of their property, enshrining equality before the law and access to it. Can I ask, which other country's legal system at that time would have allowed access to the law, let alone the outcome that the Cables received? Why aren't our children taught that Aboriginal women in South Australia had the vote before their sisters in Europe? It somewhat negates the genocide assertion, doesn't it? That said, let us not underestimate the huge dislocation that white settlement occasioned on the Indigenous people of this vast land, and some of the atrocities perpetrated, like the Mile Creek Massacre. But remember, this was not a government-sanctioned atrocity. And the sequel to it, which isn't taught, was that 7 white men had the death penalty imposed for this outrage, yet again highlighting equality before the law. As an aside, we do well to also acknowledge the good brought by the settlers, as people such as Senator Jacinta Collins and Warren Mundine are more than willing to acknowledge. And this deep embedded commitment to equality before the law was what motivated, I believe, the vast bulk of Australians to overwhelmingly reject the voice to Parliament referendum, an enduring virtue which thankfully continues to be held in to this day. One person, one vote, we're all equal before the law. Each generation needs to have passed to it the virtues, principles and values which is its inheritance, and then the need to guard, protect and promote the inheritance in perpetuity. So many things we take for granted in our society, and the way we do business is founded in the biblical or Judeo-Christian principles. For example, the right to a fair trial, the right to cross-examine an accuser, that a labourer is worthy of his hire and a fair wage, the value we should place on human life, the concept of rehabilitation, and the list goes on. Another bedrock of the Christian faith is that we are all here for a purpose, and we have an eternal hope. Sociologists continually remind us the 2 fundamentals for human well-being are, and yes, you've guessed it, purpose and hope, which Christianity delivers by the bucket load. And yet there are those who would seek to denigrate Christianity while promoting every other type of spirituality. Go figure. And I have a little Queensland story at this stage, where when the ABC in Brisbane moved to new headquarters, they decided to have a smoking ceremony, quote, to ward off evil spirits, quote unquote, from the then chairman of the ABC. So I then asked at Senate estimates why this was done. It was to ward off evil spirits and as an action to show support for the Indigenous community in Queensland. I was suspecting that that would be the answer. So I did a bit of research, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics told me that Aboriginal people in Queensland were more likely to be of the Christian faith than the non-Aboriginal people. So Christianity was by far the preferred religion of the vast bulk of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. Then it was atheist or no religion at all, and then it petered off. And I then asked to which cohort of the Indigenous community were they seeking to appeal. And of course I was given a word salad of nonsense because they didn't have an answer. The idea, and indeed when I was minister in the Howard government, it took me up to the Torres Strait Islands for matters fisheries, and I learnt an amazing thing, and I went up there when I was chair of the Native Title Committee as well. And they would start every meeting, not with a welcome to country, but with a Christian prayer. And for left-wing members of the committee, they were sort of gobsmacked. And then they wanted to finish the meeting with a prayer as well. And what do they celebrate up there on the 1st of July each year? The coming of the light, the arrival of the London Missionary Society, which was able to free them from the witch doctor that had sway over the whole community. They saw it as a wonderful, wonderful liberation. Do you hear any of that being taught in our schools today? Why not? Our children are entitled to know that despite the Mile Creek atrocities and other things that occurred, there were also some exceptionally good things that occurred, and we should be celebrating that, and that in itself would give our young people not a sense of guilt, but a sense of being part of a culture and a heritage which was a force for good. An institution worthy of our full support is, you may have guessed it, the wonderful Constitutional Monarchy with which we are blessed. And for what it's worth, my wife Andrea and I had the privilege on Thursday evening of meeting the Queen of Denmark in Tasmania, of course a Tasmanian girl by birth, and it was singularly uncomfortable for many people to learn that Denmark, such a sophisticated country, and of course, as we heard earlier, Sweden, constitutional monarchies. And for us, it's an institution which has evolved from an absolute monarchy to one which is now a safety valve against the excesses of parliaments, or more likely, prime ministers and premiers. And indeed, we were told about what happened in 1975. And in a nutshell, you had a prime minister determined to cling on to power, and a leader of the opposition determined to snatch power. And so you had, if I can use the analogy, sort of the two big bulls of Australian politics, tall in stature, absolutely filled with their own sense of right, and they were clashing big time. There was a huge stalemate. And forgive me being in Queensland if I use an Aussie rules analogy, but the Governor-General basically blew the whistle, bounced the ball to allow the game to commence again. And in bouncing the ball and allowing the game to commence again, it was giving it over to the Australian people to determine how will this deadlock be resolved. You either vote for the Prime Minister and his team, or the Leader of the Opposition and his team. It was a wonderful safety valve, and of course we know that history tells us that the Australian people overwhelmingly voted for the Leader of the Opposition. But that aside, even if the Prime Minister would have been re-elected, it was the safety valve that allowed the Australian people to have their say. And the good thing is that the monarch, or the monarch's representative, is not beholden to anyone other than the people to uphold the Constitution against parliamentary abuse. Sure, our monarch's not elected, but I ask, do we really want an elected president, like in other countries? Do we want a president and a prime minister who might have competing mandates, which may be in direct opposition to each other? How would that work out for us? An independent upholder of the Constitution in a Governor-General or a monarch is clearly so much better. For those self-appointed, usually unelected commentators who denigrate our wonderful system, which has withstood the test of time and not found to be wanting in any way, shape or form, are always flummoxed when confronted with the democracy league tables, which highlights the high ranking of constitutional monarchies in the democratic systems and how the lowest 50 are all republics. Indeed, in debating with a now defunct holder of the position of Parliamentary Secretary for the Republic at the Australian National University, I was able to make a few relevant points, given, as you might imagine, at the Australian National University, and this was just a few years ago, where the debate had commenced with the obligatory acknowledgement of certain elders past, present, and, as it happened on that occasion, and future. In front of the student body, I posed the rhetorical question, as to how these elders were appointed. Were they elected? Were they appointed or elevated by descent? Not so rhetorically, I inquired why the Parliamentary Secretary could not find it in himself to acknowledge our elders past, present and future, namely Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III and Princes William and George. The student body surprisingly agreed, and over drinks afterwards I was genuinely surprised and warmed by the supportive comments directed to me on that point. Because if democratic principles have to apply to all in authority, surely it must apply to all, including to those acknowledged earlier that evening. One thing I have determined is that consistency and coherency is not the strong suit of those that would seek to denigrate their own inheritance. But what is worse is the hypocrisy. Any argument which might be deployed to undermine our wonderful heritage is eagerly embraced and amplified by the naysayers, while steadfastly refusing to apply those same standards to the cause that they seek to promote. Which brings me to another point and a lament. It is the growing tribalism in public debate and the application of standards. Whatever the behaviour discussed needs to be condemned outright if exhibited by opponents, and perfectly excusable if not lauded if exhibited by fellow tribesmen. There is such a thing as objective truth and objective standards. It is unacceptable behaviour. If it is unacceptable behaviour, it needs to be condemned irrespective in which camp it's being deployed. Another lament is current parliaments finding it necessary to apologise and distance themselves from the decisions of their forebears. The idea that this may become their own fate, courtesy of the next generation of parliamentarians, seems to escape them. Also inherent in this approach is the unwillingness to accept that the forebears may have actually been well motivated, applying standards which have since evolved. Honouring our inheritance, bequeathed from our forebears, is a worthy cause, especially given we are the beneficiaries of the work, sacrifices and vision which has provided us with such a great country. The excellent work of your fellow Queenslander, Dr. Christopher Reynolds, not to be confused with Henry Reynolds, I hasten to add, what a capital idea, is an unvarnished and untarnished account of our country and its history, as is Tony Abbett's latest book on Australian history. It's well worth a read. And both of those books are books that I would fully commend to you, and they do suggest that there is a lot in our inheritance that is worth honouring. So let's dedicate ourselves to doing exactly that, which is why I can conclude by saying, may God save the King and may God bless Australia. Thank you.